Good morrow everyone, Silvershire here, and for whatever reason, the video I made 2 years ago about the character design of Nightmare from the Soulcalibur series has been getting a lot of attention lately. I even received a comment from one of the best character design channels out there, which is super exciting. If you're watching this ABI, thank you so much for your insights. This inspired me to finally start a video that I've been planning for a long time, a tier list for every single costume in the Soulcalibur series, which, as you can imagine, is quite an undertaking, and I'm really happy with how it's turning out so far. The thing is, when I was writing the script, the section for one character in particular ended up being way longer than anticipated, and I had to cut a lot of it. But I would hate to waste my mediocre analysis, so I decided to turn this into its own video. What exactly do I mean when I say that this is the most genius design in the Soulcalibur series? Well, I think that, perhaps more than any other in the series, this character's costume is a perfect reflection of his personality and role in the story. And I put his face in the thumbnail, so I don't know why I'm setting this up like some kind of mystery. Today, I am talking about none other than Soulcalibur V's resident douche canoe, Patroclus Alexander. Or sometimes Alexandra. It's inconsistent. For those of you who haven't played or just don't remember Soulcalibur V that well, here's a brief overview of Patroclus. Skip to here if you don't need it. Sophia Alexandra is one of the main characters of the Soulcalibur series, having appeared in every game up until 5. She's a Greek holy warrior who acts as the game's primary beacon of light and hope and goodness and all that crap. Then, Soulcalibur V features a 17-year time skip, in which most of the original cast are killed or otherwise written off to make room for a new generation of fighters. One such example of this is Sophia's son Patroclus. Patroclus is infamous in the Soulcalibur fandom, not only for replacing a fan-favorite character, but also for just kind of being a prick. His dialogue contains such gems as,
"At last, you understand how weak you are."
And he goes on and on about how noble he is, even though he's so obsessed with finding his mother's killer that he ends up murdering a lot of innocent people. To be fair, this is all purposeful on Project Soul's behalf. They want us to see Patroclus in a negative light so that he can have a redemption arc. The problem is, due to budget and time restraints, his arc is more of an equilateral triangle, where he becomes a better person because the plot needs him to, I guess? But despite his flaws as a vessel for storytelling, his character design is one of the most multi-layered in the entire series. Let's begin not by talking about Patroclus himself, but his weapons, specifically his signature Arcadia shield. As the story mode for Soulcalibur V makes abundantly clear, Patroclus is trying, and mostly failing, to emulate his mother, and anyone who has played the other Soulcalibur games will instantly recognize that the emblem on his shield is the same as hers. However, the shape of the shield is very different. So the question is, if he's trying to emulate Sophia, why doesn't he use a round shield like she does? There's two reasons. The first is the simpler one, shape language. Curves are generally associated with calmness and friendliness, while sharp corners are generally associated with action and danger. So Patroclus' triangular shield is a visual indicator that he is more aggressive than his predecessor. This can be seen to a lesser extent in Cassandra's shield. As the more hot-headed and combative of the Alexandra sisters, her shield has a bit of a point on either end instead of being a perfect circle. The second reason is a little more specific to Patroclus. Let's take a closer look at the outline of his shield. Does it remind you of anything? No? Well, what if it was blue and had a horn in the center of it? That's right, Patroclus' shield is Nightmare's helmet. I mean, it's not one-to-one, but the similarities here seem too great to be coincidental. Just as Graf Dumas manipulates Patroclus by taking advantage of his desire to live up to his mother's example, he envelops her symbol and transforms it into his own twisted image. Though Patroclus is nominally a holy warrior, by doing Dumas' dirty work, he is the antithesis of everything that Sophia stood for, which is reflected in the color of his shield. It's red and silver, the exact opposite of her blue and gold. So now let's talk about what he's actually wearing. In general, Soulcalibur V tried to simplify its character designs after the complex and over-the-top costumes from Soulcalibur IV, but Patroclus seems to be an exception to this. His outfit is made up of at least 5 different materials, he's covered in belts and medallions, he's wearing a lynx pelt over his shoulders, and he has enough fine details to make a fan artist cry in frustration. But none of these are criticisms, because this costume is Patroclus to a T. He is a character defined by arrogance, self-righteousness, and flamboyance. His fighting style, while reminiscent of Sophitia's and Cassandra's, is full of flourishes and unnecessary acrobatics that they lack. I mean, just look at his idle pose. There is no reason to take up this stance other than thinking it looks cool. Everything about Patroclus' costume reflects this vanity and pompousness. The medallions make it look like he is of great import within some sort of military, the pelt indicates that he's a trophy hunter, the elaborate patterns on his clothing make it clear that he is exorbitantly wealthy, and the choice to primarily wear bright white shows that he lives luxuriously enough to not worry about getting dirty. He even wears starkly contrasting and therefore attention-grabbing black leather boots, as opposed to the more neutral brown leather that the other Alexandras prefer. He's just begging for us to look at him and see how awesome he is. On the subject of color, there's some interesting things going on with Patroclus' palette. The color white serves a few purposes besides making him look rich and fancy. It's a color associated with holiness and purity, which are traits that Patroclus tries to exemplify, keyword being tries. And it's also Sophitia's main color. But when combined with red, it calls to mind a different sort of holy warrior, a Templar Knight. I could go on for a while about Templar imagery and its implications, but the short version is, Patroclus is on a crusade of sorts while working for Graf Dumas, and his search for the Malfested with a ring blade is not unlike the quest for the Holy Grail. While the Knights Templar are often glorified in pop culture, the real Crusades were ugly and violent, which is mirrored in how Patroclus thinks he's making the world a better place, but is seen by common people like Zvi for the heartless murderer that he is. Oh, and quick side note, Patroclus' affiliation with felines naturally puts him at odds with Zvi, who is affiliated with canines by means of, being one. Furthermore, these accents tie into the age-old fantasy trope of blue being good and red being evil. Soulcalibur's character designs don't follow this trend super closely. The main antagonist of the series is called the Azure Knight, after all. But since Patroclus' sister Pyrrha starts out wearing blue, and then switches to red when she turns evil, I think that the artists over at Project Soul were definitely keeping this symbolism in mind when designing Patroclus. This is further evidenced by the fact that the red on his costume switches to blue once he accepts himself for who he is and unlocks Soulcalibur's true form. Speaking of which, let's talk about Alpha Patroclus. Well, I do think it's lazy that they just repainted Patroclus, gave him Setsuka's moveset, and called that a new character. It does an excellent job of showing his growth and development. In fact, you could say it does a better job than the story mode does. By removing the pelt and switching to a more understated color scheme, Patroclus loses much of the flamboyance that marked his immaturity. Additionally, the move away from the color white is a visual indication that he is no longer trying to emulate Sophitia or be a holy warrior, and is instead ready to
carve my own fate!
When Pyrrha finally gives in to Soul Edge and becomes Pyrrha Omega, she too switches from white to black. This may seem strange at first, as one would expect their palettes to grow more and more dissimilar as they slide further apart from one another on the alignment chart. But within the context of Soulcalibur V's ending, it makes perfect sense. You see, the big reveal in this game is that Soulcalibur is just as power-hungry as Soul Edge, and that wants to bring about an apocalypse of sorts as a way of cleansing evil from the earth. While it goes about it in a much subtler way than Soul Edge, it corrupts and manipulates its wielder all the same. Alpha Patroclus is as much a slave to Soulcalibur as Pyrrha Omega is to Soul Edge. By dressing them both in black, Project Soul shows that the siblings, and by extension the Soul Swords, aren't so different from one another after all. Either that, or they just thought it looked cool. There's a lot more that I could potentially talk about, such as how he literally takes up more space than any of the other Alexandras because he wears loose, baggy fabric instead of something more form-fitting, or how that little blue thing on his chest is reminiscent of Sophitia's accessories. And all of that is without talking about his animations, which further support the claims that I've made throughout this video. But, as a rampant Soulcalibur V apologist who has a nostalgic soft spot in his heart for this garbage can of a character, I think I've done my part in shining some light on one of Soulcalibur V's greatest achievements. I don't really know how to end this video, so I guess subscribe if you want to see that ranking the costumes video I mentioned earlier, and I would greatly appreciate it if you liked or maybe even shared this video. I'm approaching 100 subs, which is super exciting. Also, go check out Sugar Punch Design Works, they're cool. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, I bid thee farewell.